Well, folks, the news is coming at you fast and furious. Man, hearings with Comey and hearings with the new Supreme Court nominee, and the president now today is going to Capitol Hill with a message for congressional Republicans. It's time to fulfill a top campaign promise: repeal and replace Obamacare.
Well, the discussion today comes after the president traveled to Kentucky last night, where he promised to move ahead with his agenda for America. Heather Sells has the story.
Thousands stood in line in Louisville to hear the president talk about his push to repeal and replace Obamacare, along with other issues like jobs, trade, and immigration reform.
Next to you and defend her.
The president is pushing for a vote Thursday in the House, and his remarks last night conveyed a sense of urgency. He promised to move quickly to other important matters, but he says the health care bill has to be passed first.
Finally, we want a very big tax cut, but cannot do that until we keep our promise to repeal and replace the disaster known as Obamacare.
The president blasted Democrats for jamming Obamacare through Congress 7 years ago. But right now, he must convince the most conservative House members in his own party of the merits of his plan.
So Republicans are adding last-minute revisions to sweeten the deal. They include a more generous tax credit for older Americans and curbing the future growth of Medicaid. The president says the Republican bill will also lower the cost of medicine.
We're going to bring it down. We're going to have a great competitive bidding process. Medicine prices will be coming way down, way down, and that's going to happen fast.
The head of the conservative House Freedom Caucus is already predicting that the repeal plan won't pass. Still, the president plans to court House Republican holdouts on the Hill today, and he promised the Kentucky crowd victory in the end.
Remember, we're going to negotiate, and it's going to go to the Senate and back and forth. The end result is going to be wonderful, and it's going to work great.
Heather Sells, CBN News.
Well, the president is a tough negotiator, and I think he's going to win on this one. The Republicans have got to pass this thing. They've got to repeal Obamacare. They've got to live up to their promises. The American people want action, and they cannot continue this stuff. I mean, there's only so many deals you can make and only so many concessions you can get before you become an obstructionist, and you don't need it. But speaking of obstruction, can you believe the Democrats are going to try to smear this wonderful man, Neil Gorsuch, who's probably the most extraordinarily qualified nominee to the Supreme Court we've ever had. He's unbelievable. And on the second day of his confirmation hearings, here's what the story is with John Jessup.
Pat, today's hearing expected to be much tougher for Judge Gorsuch after an easier first day of opening statements. But the Trump administration had a more difficult time yesterday in another hearing in the House, where the FBI director addressed Russia's attempts to influence last year's presidential election. Jenna Browder has that story.
In my decade on the bench, I've tried to treat all who come before me fairly and with respect.
After more than 3 hours of listening, Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch finally spoke at his confirmation hearing, touting his family and Colorado roots.
To my teenage daughters watching out west, bathing chickens for the county fair, devising ways to keep our determined pet goat out of the garden.
Monday was the first of 4 days of hearings for Gorsuch, who's likely to take on the legacy of the late Justice Antonin Scalia. Republican senators stressed the importance of this appointment.
Arguably the most important thing the U.S. Senate will do this year is confirm the next Supreme Court justice.
Still upset about former President Obama's high court nominee, Merrick Garland, who didn't get a hearing from Senate Republicans last year, there were some tense moments for Democrats.
Your nomination is part of a Republican strategy to capture our judicial branch of government. That is why the Senate Republicans kept this Supreme Court seat vacant for more than a year.
In these opening remarks, lawmakers questioned how Gorsuch would handle issues like Roe v. Wade, the Second Amendment, and immigration. Republicans praised him as a staunch follower of the Constitution.
He has the highest level of professional qualifications, including integrity, competence, and temperament.
But it's that same originalist commitment that worries some Democrats, who say that if we still follow the Constitution word for word,
then we would still have segregated schools and bans on interracial marriage. Women wouldn't be entitled to equal protection under the law, and government discrimination against LGBT Americans would be permitted.
At the same time, on the House side, FBI Director James Comey was in the hot seat and confirmed for the first time publicly that his agency is investigating potential links between the Trump campaign and the Russian government.
I have been authorized by the Department of Justice to confirm that the FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election.
Comey testified before a congressional hearing dealing with Russian meddling in the presidential election. House Intelligence Chair Devin Nunes said they haven't found any proof of collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. The head of the FBI and National Security Agency also contradicted President Trump's claims that Obama ordered wiretapping of Trump Tower before the election.
We know there was not a physical wiretap of Trump Tower. However, it's still possible that other surveillance activities were used against President Trump and his associates.
NSA Director Mike Rogers added that they didn't uncover any evidence to back up the president's accusation. Both the FBI and NSA held back in releasing details of their investigation until the reports are complete. And in the Senate,
We hold different political and religious views, but we are united in our love.
the Supreme Court confirmation hearings continue through Thursday, with Gorsuch taking questions on the stand today. A vote in the full Senate is expected in mid-April. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Thanks, Jenna. Pat, quite a busy week on Capitol Hill.
Well, there's so much at stake. This election was about the consequences. The thing that people were concerned about is the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has tilted to the left. They have restricted religion. They have opened the doors to every kind of bizarre sexual activity. They have literally destroyed the religious framework of our nation. It isn't they've given liberty, they have given license to incredible groups. And based on those decisions, educators particularly have gone on a vendetta against people of faith. It is unbelievable. And now's the chance to change the balance. There will be at least 2 more vacancies on the court, without question. One is talking about retiring, although he's in relatively good health, but he's over 80 and he decides it's time to quit. Another is an octogenarian, but also extremely ill, and you just wonder, you know, she sleeps during a lot of the hearings and things like that. And sooner or later, this lady is going to have to retire, and that means another vacancy, which would mean, folks, for the next 30 years or so, there would be a Supreme Court that would uphold the Constitution and uphold the founding principles of our nation. It is a very important thing. The Constitution was never intended to be a living document that was at the mercy of the whim of the political correctness of the day, whatever it happened to be. And I know one judge some years ago said the Supreme Court is whatever the judges say it is. Well, I mean, the Constitution is whatever the judges say it is. That, in my opinion, is wrong. And Antonin Scalia was strong on this. Gorsuch is strong on it. And there are other, I think the next guy coming up is probably going to be William Pryor, who is a distinguished jurist on the circuit down in Georgia and in Alabama, wherever it is, it's in the South. And I think that he would probably be the next in line. And again, a strict constitutional. We're talking about a major shift in our country, a major shift. And all kinds of good things will flow from it, which means that the Republicans in the Congress, if it takes the so-called nuclear option, they've got to take it. Whatever it takes to get that thing done, they have to do it. The same thing in the House and Senate. They must take charge of the budget. They must bring this incredibly profligate government we've got under control. They've got to do it. Talking about draining the swamp, it's got to be done. Now, the voters have given them this opportunity, And the American people are going to be looking at them and say, now's your chance. You've got to fight for it, and you've got to be strong, and you've got to make it happen. And if it takes tough work, then get tough and talk tough and act tough and make it happen. Whew. So much for that. All right, John, what's next?
Pat, the United States is boycotting a United Nations Human Rights Council session this week dealing with Israel and the Palestinians. The U.S. says the regular review of Israel shows the Council's, quote, longstanding bias against Israel. And UN Ambassador Nikki Haley made an even stronger statement by pointing out that Israel is on the permanent review list compared to which countries are not. She said it is not Syria, where the regime has systematically slaughtered and tortured its own people. It is not Iran, where public hangings are a regular occurrence. It is not North Korea, where the regime uses forced labor camps to crush its people into submission. Rather, it is Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East. The boycott was announced by the State Department, and Pat, this comes as the Trump administration is considering dropping out of the UN Human Rights Council unless serious changes are made.
I think what's got to be done is budget. We've got to cut their flow of money. We pick up about 22 to 25% of the budget of the United Nations, and it's the sounding board for hate against the United States and hate against Israel. Let's cut the money.